It's been 5 years. I've been waiting since day one of that initial announcement at Crunchyroll Expo. After all of those delays, it's finally here. The Uzumaki anime has quite possibly been my most anticipated anime adaptation of the past half decade. I had been a fan of author Junji Ito since my early days of high school. He's what not only got me into horror manga, but also manga as a whole. And it all started with the Uzumaki manga. Sure, it may be the basic pick and everybody's favorite, but sometimes the most popular work really is the best. Even after reading a lot more horror manga in my days since, Uzumaki is still probably at the top for me. And the anime is getting directed by Hiroshi Nagahama, the guy who directed Flowers of Evil. Anyone who isn't a coward over the art style knows that this is going to be a truly special opportunity. There really never has been a more exciting time to be a Junji Ito fan than right now. So instead of looking at all of the cool new stuff that has come out in recent years, I'm going to go back to the turn of the century. The year is 2000. Junji Ito had just completed his magnum opus Uzumaki the year prior in 1999. At that time, a young director going by the name of Higuchinsky read Ito's manga in a magazine. He was already acquainted with horror manga, having his directorial debut with the 𝘽𝙧𝙧𝙧𝙧 TV series a couple years prior. He was about to go from breathing new life into a horror manga classic to adapting a modern horror classic. An Uzumaki movie was already in production and they were looking for a director. Higuchinsky called up writer Kaji Kengo, whom he had worked on before on 𝘽𝙧𝙧𝙧𝙧, and ended up securing the role. Early next year, the movie was about to be released. 2000's Uzumaki is a curious case for a movie. As previously mentioned, the manga was finished before the movie came out. However, the movie was still in production before the manga had completed its serialization, meaning they didn't have a conclusive ending to work off of. For anime and manga fans, at least back in the time of this film's release, were used to anime adaptations not being complete or fully accurate tellings of the source material. At what point to end and how to end was a crucial and oftentimes polarizing decision for many series. Uzumaki, on the other hand, takes a unique approach with its movie original ending.
The manga was not complete, and instead of having the film complete the story, I wanted the film itself to be a loop constituent. At that time, film was shown using a film reel, which was also circularly shaped. It was to be repeatedly shown, a never-ending nightmare.
You might be wondering why I'm talking about the end of the movie instead of starting from the beginning. Well, aside from the ending also being the beginning, the film also reveals another quirk seen more prominently before the internet-dominated landscape. Before the easy access of online streaming, a lot of people did not get into series from episode or chapter 1. You'd often stumble across an episode on TV while surfing the channels, or a random chapter while flipping through magazines. The first chapter of Uzumaki that Higuchinsky read in that magazine was chapter 6. Perhaps because of this, it caused the structure of the movie to become disjointed to that of the manga. The movie is divided up into 4 chapters, but certain events in the story are shuffled around. The most prominent example being the first real page-turn reveal with Toshio Saito's body crushed into the shape of a spiral. In the film, we see this happening almost an hour into the runtime and in a dream sequence at that. It's still present in the story, but this approach permeates the rest of the movie's narrative structure, and the film mainly plucks from the first 8 chapters. Now this sounds like a terrible idea on paper. Even anime adaptations around at this time would tell the story in a linear format and maybe add some anime original content to fill out the gaps in between when it catches up to the source material. Manga fans will say don't fix what isn't broken, but on the flip side, an adaptation is also an opportunity to put a new spin on an already beloved story. In fact, the direction of the film was decided on as soon as Higuchinsky went back and read the manga from the beginning, where the first couple of lines would end up dictating how the film would be made.
私の生まれ育った黒津町。これからお話しするのは、この町で起こった奇妙な話の数々です。
These words allowed me to focus on the fact that the story was told in the past. In other words, it had already been seen. Kyrie is telling numerous mysterious stories.
When viewed from this angle, I'd compare it more closely to The Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya. Infamous for its non-linear broadcast order, the series plays into that mystery and confusion from the viewer to provide a unique experience to both fans and newcomers. Similarly, Uzumaki plays into that mystery aspect. Higuchinsky said he wanted to stay faithful to the manga, but instead put a greater focus on trying to capture its atmosphere. For what it's worth, I think the film is a remarkable feat for what they were able to accomplish with the limited budget they had. The film was mostly shot in Ueda Nagano Prefecture, and it perfectly encapsulated the atmosphere of Kurozucho. The muted colors and slight green tint over the entire movie feels complementary to the original monochromatic manga in its own way. This is something I think they completely fumbled with the Junji Ito collection back in 2018. I was excited to watch it when it originally aired, but all it did was remind me of how sometimes less is more. The visual language of Junji Ito is built on grotesque detail within a limited format. This is something that's much easier to capture in film than it is in animation. Although I think going all out and filming in black and white would have been the best decision. However, while the movie is visually quite striking, and I don't mind it taking some liberties with the source material, where I feel like this movie kind of falls apart for me is in its writing. It isn't horrible per se, but when I say sometimes less is more, that also applies to character dialogue. The characters in Junji Ito manga are often purposely kept pretty shallow. They serve a different purpose than, say, in shoujo manga. Character relationships in something like Fruits Basket are much more integral than the characterization in a lot of horror. The problem I have with the Uzumaki movie is that it tries to give out more screen time to characters that were never meant to be fleshed out. Junji Ito's stories from the very beginning with Tomie have always been about people succumbing to some sort of self-destructive desire. The horror comes from seeing people break down and losing touch of their humanity because of a hypnotic curse and ruminating on the aftermath. Junji Ito may be most famous for his page turns, but Azumi revealing how her scar made a giant hole in her head is not that scary on its own. It makes for a good t-shirt design, but seeing how the spiral consumes both Okada and herself is what gives everything a lasting impact. Inserting more scenes that attempt to develop Kirie and Shuichi's relationship doesn't contribute to any of that. It doesn't make the story better, it just makes the movie feel more ordinary. I don't need to see Shuichi's dad doing a Naruto Maki mukbang for a half a minute when all of that detail was explained just fine in one panel. That's not to say that all of the movie's original material is bad though. Part of what makes Uzumaki so memorable is how creative it is in coming up with new ways to incorporate spiral shapes into its story. There's a part in the movie where Kirie prepares some strawberry cake for Shuichi's mother in the hospital. However, since she's so traumatized from seeing her dead husband being consumed by the spiral, Shuichi has to throw her cake away because the whipped cream on top is in the shape of a spiral.
ごめんなさい。
つむじや指紋も渦巻きだろう。だから見せないようにしてるんだ。食べる？
This is my favorite moment of Shuichi and Kirie as a couple across all of Uzumaki. Not because it's cute or heartwarming, but because it's the complete opposite of that. Kirie is the one always being hopeful, and Shuichi is the one clinging onto any hope he can. Her optimism getting crushed right in front of her eyes is heartbreaking in a way that I think is unique to this scene. It's like the ethos of This Night Has Opened My Eyes by the Smiths was made into a single scene. Uzumaki is not a happy story. Horrible things happen as the world around them deteriorates into chaos. Survival is of the utmost importance, and this scene is a cynical wake-up call for Kirie that their lives aren't the same anymore. Despite my criticisms though, at the end of the day, I'd say I enjoyed it more than I didn't. Regardless of whether you like it or not, I think it's a movie worth watching if you're a fan of Junji Ito and you're curious about it. It's a movie with its own vision, and I can respect it for that. You could certainly do a lot worse, like Tomie Replay. Now this movie just completely sucks. I sometimes forgot I was watching a movie based on a Junji Ito manga because the movie really does feel like a forgettable B-grade horror film, although I guess it makes sense considering the only thing it has in common with the manga is the titular character. So why am I talking about this movie that I didn't think was all that good? Well, it was actually played alongside Uzumaki in theaters. That's right, on February 11th in 2000, you could have put down that Dreamcast controller and watched Uzumaki and Tomie replay as a double feature. Something that actually made Higuchinsky pretty unhappy. It was advertised as a horror showdown when he never saw his movie as a horror movie in the first place. In fact, he isn't really a fan of horror movies. He wanted to make something like The Devil's Ballad from 1977, a mystery thriller film about a private detective visiting a remote town to investigate an unsolved murder case. Tomie Replay, on the other hand, is unmistakably a horror film, and honestly, I can see somebody getting some enjoyment out of it if schlocky horror films are your thing. If I had to praise it for anything, the creators really understood the character of Tomie. Her main abilities are regeneration and making people unhealthily obsessed with her. The thing about Tomie Replay is that it's a part of a series. The first movie from 1998 captivated audiences so much that it came back with vengeance again a year later, with Tomie Another Face. And then they only made 6 more movies. They made 9 Tomie movies. 9 of them. Now that's a scary endurance challenge for Halloween. Maybe not quite as terrifying as watching every Halloween movie on Halloween, but that's enough talking about bad movies. Maybe I would have been better off staying at home playing that Dreamcast. Speaking of which, did you know that Junji Ito made a cover illustration for a magazine called Game Criticism? Volume 25 from 1999 features an interview with him where he talks about the inspiration for the cover. He saw that the Dreamcast logo was a spiral and he wanted to depict somebody who became obsessed with it. So he's being haunted by the ghost of the Dreamcast. I have a limited edition Hello Kitty Dreamcast, so I like to believe that the woman on the cover is one of those toxic Sanrio girls you hear people talking about. Strangely fitting too, because literally right now, there is a Junji Ito and Sanrio collab going on. Their pop-up store is currently being held in Parco, a chain department store kinda like a JCPenney. The main attraction is of course Tomie, but you also have the beautiful boy at the crossroads from Junji Ito's Love Sickness collection. The Curse of Tomie must have spellbound everybody because literally everything with her was sold out. These pillows here were pretty much the only thing left. Unfortunate, but if you want to become the ultimate toxic Hello Kitty girl, this is what you're looking for. Well, that was fun. Going back to the magazine though, there was another question that stood out to me. One of the questions was, what do you think about the Dreamcast? And he said he wasn't really familiar with games at all. I found this interesting because the Uzumaki movie was actually not the first adaptation of his seminal manga, but rather it was a video game. About a week before the movie came out, Uzumaki Denshi Kaiki-hen was released on the Wonderswan. Let's pop it in and see what it's all about. Is it turned to the wrong side? Why is it tilted like that? Well, it's not a bug, it's a feature. The main feature of the Wonderswan is depending on what game you're playing, you may have to readjust the orientation of your console. You can play games either horizontally or vertically. That's why you have an extra set of buttons here so you can hold it upright. Denshi Kaiki-hen uses this vertical position because it's a visual novel. Neat, because lately I have actually been trying to get more into reading VNs. I've been playing through and enjoying Tsubahime quite a bit, so I was excited to try out something that came out the same year I was born. Getting into the game, I immediately see that it's trying to be a lot more faithful to the manga in terms of story progression. It follows the manga in a chronological order and uses panels from it as event CGs. They also translate really well to the Wonderswan as they're both in black and white. So Denshi Kaiki-hen covers more ground than the movie, but that doesn't mean it doesn't have pacing quirks of its own. Let me summarize the events for you to give you an idea. The opening Spiral Obsession arc is skimmed through in a mere couple of minutes. The Scar chapter, meanwhile, is drawn out to over 40 minutes in my playtime, and afterwards they completely skip over chapters 4 and 5 to get to chapter 6. This one ends up being a bit shorter, clocking in at roughly 15 minutes for me, but then chapter 7 is another long one at just under 30 minutes. Perhaps the weirdest decision from this game though is going from chapter 7, which is the first chapter from volume 2 of the manga, to the final chapter of volume 2 before rolling the credits. What is here still makes for a good good read, but it's obviously going to be divisive. The manga is always going to be the most authentic way of experiencing the story. That much will never change. Being in an interactive medium, though, is what allows it to do some things not possible in manga or film, and that's what I want to focus on. Throughout the story, you will be given several dialogue options to choose from. The game advertises that we can change the outcome of the story based on the decisions we make. This includes multiple what-if styled endings. For example, instead of Okada being consumed by Azumi's spiral curse, what if it was Kirie? Shuichi and her are the only ones who aren't consumed by the spiral curse until the very end of the manga. Without their bond, no one else would be able to solve the case. Naturally, the save option is disabled for these moments to make that decision feel more decisive. Thankfully, you don't have to replay the game from the beginning either to try out different options, as you can skip ahead to any page you've read from the options menu. You've got basically everything you'd want for a standard visual novel, with the exception of an auto-advance button. Considering it's a horror game though, having to press forward manually makes it feel more tense. Perhaps the most notable thing about this game though is the sound. Games on old consoles like this would typically use chiptune music, but Denshi Kaiki-hen goes the extra mile in the audio department. It features extensive use of digitized sound, meaning they can make music that sounds like this. The sound significantly thickens the atmosphere of the game. It does have the drawback of taking up a lot more space on the cartridge, but considering the game is entirely text-based, this was a smart decision to make the most of what you have. It feels complementary to what the movie was trying to accomplish in expanding the atmosphere of the original work in a way that takes advantage of its medium. That extra space could have been used to put more CGs in the game, but I actually like how stripped back the presentation is. Junji Ito is of course most famous for his drawings. Like I mentioned before though, his drawings only have the pull that they do because of the consequences that happen to the characters. The actual story is arguably just as effective when told with minimal visuals, and what is here visually is still pretty decent. I don't love how the text alignment sometimes goes over the backgrounds in awkward ways. It can make it a bit hard to read and it doesn't look amazing, but the page turns accompanied with the screams and general sound design really make up for it. Maybe all of this seems primitive, but context matters. Remember, you're playing this on a portable console. You can take it around anywhere like a book. It's like an ebook with extra steps. Just imagine stepping outside and observing nature with the context of the story. You won't see spirals the same way ever again. It's like what they say about black cats. Do they actually bring bad luck, or is it just putting that idea in your head to make you wary? Now this is the real way to experience the game. Well, it would be if I could see anything. Something I forgot to mention about the Wonderswan is that it was developed by Gunpei Yokoi, the creator of the Game Boy, and just like the Game Boy, it doesn't have a backlit screen and it looks like complete trash. I know it was made that way to give it a longer battery life, but I can barely see the screen even in ideal lighting conditions. Maybe my screen isn't in the best shape. It also leads to the main problem I have with this game, which is that it feels kinda pointless. So this game retailed for 3,500 yen, which granted is less than half of what a console game would cost you. Taking into account the fact that it's a budget title made as promotional material for a movie, they probably just wanted to give people an option to catch up on the source material to have some context for the movie. Kinda makes sense. In a vacuum, except the movie was already made to stand on its own and has completely different goals from the manga. Having more context of the story would just make it worse if you don't like its direction. It's not like Denshi Kaikan is the most accurate representation of the manga as is anyway. In fact, think about it, most manga tankobons around this time would have cost you around 500 yen. You could have bought 7 manga volumes with the same amount of money that this game cost. Aside from a lot of the long-running titles, that's a complete set for a lot of series. For less than half of the price, you could have just bought the manga for Uzumaki, put on a vinyl or a CD, and you could have some external music accompany you as you're reading. When I first got into Junji Ito, I was really into the apocalyptic themes of Muse and would play Absolution on repeat while reading. You can make reading manga as immersive of an experience as you want, and they don't require batteries to be readable. But isn't the selling point of this game the fact that it has multiple endings? I mean, yes, but also no. The back cover is pretty deceptive about the actual impact that your choices have, because most of them follow the illusion of choice where they don't actually have an effect on the story. Let's take the Jack-in-the-Box chapter for instance. When Yamaguchi rises from the grave, he jumps towards Shuichi and Kirie until his decaying body eventually rots away so that he can't move anymore. The game gives you the option to hit him with the shovel they brought along to break his legs off, which gives off the exact same result. This is not like Fate's Stay Night where you have multiple endings based on precise choices you make throughout the game, but Fate came out 4 years after Denshi Kaikan, so is it really a fair comparison? Okay, let's see what other visual novels you could have been playing around this time. Sui no Sora came out in 1999. It's a classic Denpake VN and spiritual predecessor of sorts to Suba Hibi, one of the most beloved VNs of all time. I guess Denshi Kaikan is better than the Sui no Sora OVA that later came out, but that isn't high praise. At the tail end of 2000, you could have played Tsukihime, which was Tide Moon's first game before Fate. Key had Canon and Air back-to-back in 1999 and 2000 respectively. Even if some of these games are a bit more expensive than Denshi Kaikan, they'll give you a lot more original material to enjoy. Skip ahead a couple years and we start seeing even more classic horror visual novels like Song of Saya and Higurashi come out. Uzumaki Denshi Kaikan is a functional product. But this was such a pivotal era for VNs that you could have done better with just about anything else. There were better anime and manga licensed VNs on the market. None of them were based on Uzumaki aside from Denshi Kaikan, but the best ones are the ones that expand upon the original work. A good example would be Tokyo Mew Mew Tojo Shin Mew Mew. It's a fully voiced RPG visual novel hybrid, which makes it more of an interactive experience. But the main selling point is that it introduces a character named Ringo Akai, a character that is completely new and original that is exclusive to that game. That's the kind of thing that could make even a non-gamer interested in playing your game. It's a lot more interesting than getting an alternate ending that's basically just you getting killed instead of somebody else. Even if you were enjoying the writing of Denshi Kaikan, the real ending is so unsatisfactory that it completely sours the entire experience. Basically, it's the ending of chapter 12 where Shuichi and Kirie try to escape the typhoon, but they get sucked into it and later find themselves waking up beside the dragonfly pond. Kirie's parents found them floating there, and the credits roll after they ponder if the curse of the town is preventing them from ever escaping it. The real slap in the face is how the game plays the same ending music for this part as it does for the bad endings. It's a sort of whimsical tune that works fine for a bad ending scenario, but for the real ending, it only emphasizes how inconclusive it feels. There's a reason why not even hardcore Junji Ito fans are seeking this game out. There is next to no information about it on the internet. That's how obscure it is. I found an advertisement that Eriko Hatsune, who played Kirie in the movie, was set to appear in the game, but I never saw her anywhere and she's nowhere to be found in the credits. I had a hunch that she might be the one doing the digitized screams. If that were the case though, it would feel like disingenuous advertisement. Then again, it wouldn't be too far off from how they advertised the multiple choice options on the box. The only really neat thing about this game is the quiz you unlock as the completion bonus. Now this isn't your typical quiz game where you have simple questions you can easily answer if you're vaguely familiar with the source material, like what does John use to seal away demons? If you answered push pins, you're correct. No, this quiz is a lot more demonic. Hardcore fans would know about some of the trivia, like the release date of the movie and what magazine was the manga published in, but can you tell me the approximate population of Kurozucho? What's the data capacity of this game's ROM chip? How many people died in the lighthouse? Hey, that chapter's not even in the game. What is the ISBN number for the manga? Huh? If you somehow complete the gauntlet of nearly impossible questions, which by the way are under a very strict time limit, your reward is a picture. Well, there are a couple different ones you can get, probably depending on your score. It's not very exciting, but it's about what I expected. Pretty much sums up my feeling about this game too. Man, playing that quiz got me wanting to watch more Junji Ito videos on YouTube. This one about him visiting the Winchester house was pretty enjoyable. Never thought I'd see him doing the whip and nene as late as 2019, but here we are. Ignore the fact that the channel just so happened to have 666,000 subscribers as I was watching this video. Anyway, if you're enjoying my video, please consider subscribing to my channel and supporting me on Patreon like the people on screen. Just $1 will give you access to my Discord server where you'll be able to talk to me and other people who love niche anime. I want to keep doing this for as long as I possibly can, so your contributions will be invaluable to me. Thanks for hearing me out.
Goodbye forever, team.
But I have an eerie feeling that I'm not actually done yet. Oh, how could I forget? I remember seeing it in Junji Ito's art book, Twisted Visions. Not to be confused with the other Twisted Visions book that has that Higuchinsky interview in it. They had records of all of his works and art pieces. Uzumaki Denshi Kaiki-hen was nowhere to be found, but I saw something else looming in the shadows of the papers. There it was, Uzumaki Noroi Simulation. Another goddamn game for the Wonderswan? How the hell did this happen? How is there not one, but two Uzumaki games on the same system? What the hell even is a Wonderswan? I already mentioned that it was developed by Gunpei Yokoi, but something I didn't mention was that it was actually released by Bandai. They're a major publisher and sponsor with many licenses under their belt. The Wonderswan in particular is noteworthy for its cavalcade of licensed games based on anime and manga. It was only released in Japan, so many of its titles are unfortunately not easily accessible to a foreign audience. Not to mention that it was also competing against the Game Boy Color at the time, which had Pokemon, so while it lost to Nintendo, it still held up some pretty respectable numbers in its own rights. You can even see it referenced in a couple of anime series. Look, there's Mamimi playing it in episode 2 of Fooly Cooly. If you're interested, Yannick Mannion has been working on a series called Swansong that's dedicated to documenting every Wonderswan game ever released. I've been following it for a couple years now, and it's a fascinating series that talks about these games with the respect they deserve. YouTube's not easy, so always be sure to support smaller channels whenever you can. With all that being said, let's get to actually talking about Uzumaki Noroi Simulation. The name of the game translates into Curse Simulation. It's a much easier translation than Denshi Kaiki-hen, where the Denshi part of the name has a very peculiar spelling. This combination of kanji is not really used in Japanese, but is rather more commonly seen in Chinese spellings, and it means television. When put together, it roughly translates into Uzumaki Mysterious Television Chapter. Television game is a bit of an old-fashioned term used to refer to all video games on any console, and you still see some sites like Japanese Amazon using it. In simpler terms, it's a way of telling you that you're gonna be reading Uzumaki in a digital format. But what exactly is a curse simulation? It's kinda like this. Remember going to Lavender Town in the original Pokemon games and talking to that one girl asking you if you believe in ghosts? That white hand on your shoulder? It's not real. But if it was real, what if you could play as it and terrorize innocent bystanders just for fun? What immediately sets Curse Simulation apart from everything else I've talked about today is the player POV. Instead of putting yourself in the shoes of the protagonist, you are the antagonist. The Spiral Sage from the end of the 3rd volume of Uzumaki shows you his face to send you on a mission, to spread the curse of the spiral all across Kurozucho. This part is noteworthy because it taps into an underrated aspect of Junji Ito's manga, which is his comedy. The Sage's dialogue is tongue-in-cheek. He starts off by asking us if we want to know about the spiral curse, and if we say no, we get an instant game over before even getting the chance to play. If we lend him our ear, he tells us to read the manga if we're not familiar with the story, because he can't be bothered to explain it himself. With that attitude, you know he's an authentic manga fan. He's probably the type of guy to take screen caps of random background characters and in-between frames to talk about how the animators butchered the manga. Can't wait for him to do that with the anime. By accepting his conditions though, he sends us on our first mission. If you want, he's even kind enough to offer us a hint. hint. By taking it, he tells us to put the item we're about to receive in the Saito family's house located on the east side of the map. This serves as an introduction to the basic gameplay loop. We have to scour this map, checking for strange activities in each area. What we're looking for are event triggers to progress the narrative. This in turn lets us obtain more cursed items to put in our inventory. These will then be used to send the town into chaos. We receive a ticket to the Uzumaki movie in exchange for one of our lives. Very subtle advertising. Declining his offer makes him give us a movie poster instead. I wonder if it's the same one in the movie. You know, the one that has Junji Ito on it? But okay, how does our health affect the game? The way you lose lives is by placing the cursed items in the wrong places, eventually resulting in a game over if not careful. Successfully placing an item in the correct spot will give you anywhere from 30% to 100% into your curse gauge. Keep doing that until every available location in that area is cursed and you get to move on to the next chapter. That's the gist of it. It's actually a very simple game when you get down to it. The challenge appropriately comes from your knowledge of the source material to know where to put the cursed items. They'll be relevant to events that take place in the manga. You heard what the sage said from the beginning after all, but don't fret because it isn't entirely reliant on it. You once again have a pretty generous save feature that allows you to use some trial and error whenever necessary. Most of the time the game is pretty good about leading you in the right direction from the dialogue though. Since we're the antagonist of this game, we are watching over the town and hearing in on the conversations that take place in it. The story is told in a linear fashion just like Denshi Kaiki-hen, except it actually reaches the original ending. This makes it the only one of the three to tell the full story. Well, pretty much anyway. It does skip over a few chapters like the other two. The ones not included are chapters 5, 7, 10, and 11. This leaves Mosquito and the umbilical cord as the only chapters not featured in any of these adaptations. It still contains most of the story, but you'd have to wait a year later until Freddy Got Fingered came out if you wanted a good umbilical cord scene. Overall, I'd say they generally improved upon the pacing from Denshi Kaiki-hen though. It doesn't feel quite as unbalanced where some chapters are just exponentially longer than others. Unlike Denshi Kaiki-hen and the movie, however, Curse Simulation is not an on-rails experience. A visual novel or movie is always moving forward. You can have multiple choice dialogue options and alternate endings in a visual novel, but that doesn't change the fact that you still advance by pressing a single button. Curse Simulation sometimes runs into this problem where it's needlessly vague about where to go. A character might be going from point A to point B, and you'll have to enter the areas in between to progress the scene instead of just going to point B. Here's an example from the Typhoon chapter. If you remember in the manga, Shuichi is running through town alarming people of the incoming storm. The game says he's headed towards the station, but instead of going to the station, you first have to pay a visit to the playground to follow his movements. Just feels like padding for time. Make sure you drop Kirie's bento box in the dragonfly pond to trigger the Typhoon, by the way, because if you consume it elsewhere, you get an instant game over regardless of your health. On a related note, item management can also be a bit cumbersome. Near the beginning of the game, you get a bicycle. This bicycle is never used for anything in the entire game. It only serves to act as a red herring to waste your time thinking it'll be used somewhere. All of the items have their own predetermined designated slot in the inventory, so sometimes you end up having to scroll through multiple pages of nothing to get to the item you need. Curse Simulation is one of those games that sound really cool when you explain it. A game where you play as this devilish mastermind watching over a poor town as you slowly make people go mad from your antics? It's like an evil version of SimCity. So basically how everybody ends up playing SimCity. That type of game has a lot of potential, but playing Curse Simulation feels more like an exercise. The further you get into it, the more the map expands. It starts off manageable and then gets ridiculous after the Typhoon chapter. Now every time the game gets vague about what to do next, you have more than 10 areas to check one by one. You have lives which honestly do not always matter. In theory, they exist to prevent you from brute forcing your way through each chapter were you to misplace your items too many times. But sometimes if you mess it up, you can be put into a dead man walking situation that makes it impossible to complete the area. So the best strategy you have is to save often and reset anytime you lose a life. This way, you can actually brute force your way through the game if you have the patience. It is cool how the map completely changes, and when it gets to the third volume, it changes once more. I'll give it that. But once again, it's more annoying and time-consuming than anything else in a practical sense. The question then becomes, what is the appeal of this game? Is it trying to, or I guess attempting to create the what-if scenarios like Denshi Kaiki-hen? Not really, at least nothing on the same scale that the other game tried to do. The player character and the sage don't really get any development either. Basically, he's training you to become his protege. Why he needs one is never explained. Can't he just do it himself? Is he mortal and wants somebody to follow in his footsteps after he dies? Going off of the one page he appears in the manga, I can just assume that he's a lazy freeloader and wants somebody else to do his bidding. He only appears to congratulate you after each chapter and then tells you, "Good job. Now do it again." Good job! It's unfortunate because that evil mastermind concept never reaches its full potential. You're just experiencing a way more tedious and slower version of the manga if you don't already know what you're doing. And that's hard when literally no one has beaten this game to document it. I'm not kidding about that. Some people have recorded or streamed themselves playing it. Not a single person has gotten even halfway through the game. There are no strategy guides or walkthroughs. Nothing. Yet they still go for stupid prices online, so this video also cost me over $300 to make just from me buying these games. I am likely the first person in over 20 years to have ever seen the ending, or at least on recording, and it's actually pretty interesting. The sage tells us that our mission is complete, but we still have more training to do. He wants us to train for another 100 years before we can truly become his successor. But for the time being, we can feast on some spirals like he does at the end of Volume 3. This style of ending is of course not uncommon. I'm sure you can name at least a dozen different anime that ends with "and so the adventure continues" without us ever getting to see it. In this case, the game does sort of an encore in tandem to the final page. The manga ends by saying the future generation who builds here are going to experience the same fated demise once more. The game caps off by setting up this new evil mastermind for the next doomsday. I don't think it surpasses the crushing weight of the original ending, just leaving things off where they are. Since the sage is more of a comedic character, it makes it so the ending hangs on a more tongue-in-cheek tone. Like, yeah, I guess we're all doomed and always will be doomed. What's new? Kyoto Animation is animating City? Cool, I'm gonna drop dead someday, and my subscriptions are still gonna be sucking me dry while I'm 6 feet under. Oh, but The Cure is finally putting out that new album on November 1st? Well, I guess it's not all bad, I can hold out until then. The only thing left to talk about with this game is a minigame included on the cartridge called Snail Race. This was sort of the meta for a lot of licensed games back in the day. Have a main gameplay mode and throw a couple basic minigames on the side if you want to have something else to play. Like many of its contemporaries, Snail Race is meant to be a quick yet replayable side activity. Name your snail and you get this cute animation of it hatching. This had me wondering if they were the children of Sumura and Kariyama. Yokota ends up crushing their eggs in the manga, meaning we never get to see what they look like after hatching. The game doesn't detail where they came from though, so it's all up to speculation. Before the race, you can buy food to feed your snail. Various foods will change its stats in the race. It's a little confusing whether you want to raise or lower your stats because the main goal of this minigame is to come in last place. It's a humorous concept, but it also means having to wait upwards of 30 seconds for a race to finish when your snail gets better stats. But you also don't want a snail that speeds by everyone. Does that mean the optimal build is actually the rock from that one SpongeBob episode? No, because you also can't be too slow as that will result in your snail dying. Death will happen to the snail regardless though, as they don't live forever. Basically, you're meant to keep hatching and raising snails to beat your highest score. You can think of it as a Tamagotchi of sorts. Did you hear they're actually bringing them back with Tamagotchi Connection? When you're done shopping at Parco, you can grab yourself a Hello Kitty Tamagotchi before crushing some guy's hopes and dreams. He probably deserves it anyway. That finally leaves us with the new anime premiering on Adult Swim. How does it stack up to the rest of these adaptations? More importantly, what did I think of it? I don't know, it just came out today. What, did you think I was gonna make a timely video to talk about something that people are actually excited about? Hell no, get out of my face with that. This is a video I've been wanting to make for like 4 years now. Every time I would start to think about working on it, the anime would get delayed again, just like my will to live whenever I think of Chi from Chobits. She's the only reason I'm still here. At this point, I don't care anymore. I'd rather enjoy the anime in my own time for my own enjoyment instead of going through the stress of worrying about making a video that's probably gonna flop anyway. I love putting copious amounts of effort into everything I make only to receive jack for all in return. You see all of these YouTubers talking about how they don't care about views when you damn well know that's a load of crap. So why did I make this video if I didn't seem to like anything I talked about in this video all that much? Because I think it's all still very interesting and important. It's a part of Junji Ito history that few people know about and even fewer people take seriously. I don't have to make everything I create to be about my favorite thing ever. I'm more than willing to challenge myself to make the thing that no one else will make. Sometimes it shocks me to see what hasn't been made yet, but that's AniTube for you. The anime community is built on cyclical conversation topics until the younger fans lose interest and drop out of anime, or they get too old and don't have time to participate anymore. I've seen it happening for over 15 years now of being an anime fan, so I'll keep contributing as much as I can for as long as I can. Now if you'll excuse me, I'm going to watch the Uzumaki anime and I'm going to enjoy it. Then I'll go back to being pissed off about Mama Loves the Poyopoyosaurus not being subtitled or something. The world is not fair, I'm going to die. Good night. Hold on. What? Somebody streamed the ending to Noroi Simulation while I was editing this video? Are you kidding me? So this was all for nothing too? Man, god damn it. Look, let this be a lesson for you listening. Yes, you. Stop making excuses for yourself. Don't be like me and wait around. If you have an idea, just go for it. The world is not gonna wait around for me, and it sure as hell is not gonna wait around for you. I don't know how to end this video now. Chances are I'll probably end myself.